She always believed that their love was strong and their marriage honest. But after Raymond's death, Nora discovered a truth he never spoke of. A past buried in war. A letter that changed everything, and a search for answers that could rewrite the story they thought they knew. Before we dive into the story, let me know where you're tuning in from today. She had lost Raymond suddenly just a month earlier to what the doctors called a silent heart episode. The abruptness of it all left her in a state of quiet shock. They had been married for 47 years, a union marked by gentle companionship rather than flashy displays of passion. Each morning, Raymond brewed 2 cups of tea, though Nora rarely finished hers. He insisted on the ritual all the same, as if even minor routines had a sacred place in their shared life. He was precise, calm, consistent. If a door squeaked or a faucet dripped, he fixed it before she could comment. She found comfort in his steadfast presence. Yet there were corners of his life he kept locked. He had served in Vietnam, returning before they married, and he seldom spoke of that time. If she pressed, he would gently deflect. I worked on radio equipment in hot tents, little more. She learned early on not to push too hard. His eyes would take on a faraway look, a quiet sadness that closed off conversation. She told herself that not all memories are meant to be shared. When he passed, she was shattered. She navigated the funeral arrangements as though in a dream, receiving friends and family who spoke of Raymond's dependable nature, his calm grace. In the will reading, everything was straightforward. His modest savings, the house left to her, until the lawyer revealed a small sealed envelope taped to the back page. Inside it read, Safe Deposit Box 116C, with a key attached. The attorney handed it to her with a gentle shrug. There was no other mention of it in the official documents. She felt a wave of dread and curiosity. Why had Raymond kept a safe deposit box hidden from her? She had never known him to be secretive about finances or possessions. In the days that followed, her grief mingled with a quiet determination. She had lost him so abruptly, never saying goodbye. Now she held a key that might open a window into the years he kept hidden. Her mind flickered with possibilities. Perhaps it was something trivial, a deed to property or old photos. But a deeper intuition warned that it might be far more significant. She went to the bank, a small branch downtown with sun-faded blinds. She approached the teller with trembling hands, showing the key and the note. The manager escorted her to a private room, where a tall, narrow metal box was retrieved from the vault. Her heart hammered as she unlocked it. Inside, she found a single manila folder labeled in thick, black marker, "For Nora only." She stared at it for a long moment, her breath uneven. Finally, she mustered the courage to open it. The folder contained only 2 things, a photograph and a birth certificate. The photograph showed a young Vietnamese boy, perhaps 7 or 8, standing solemnly outside a modest storefront. His hair was dark, his expression tense, and one hand was held by a woman in an ao dai. The woman's face was partially turned away, but her eyes were strong, protective. Nora's pulse quickened. She had never seen these people before. Yet the child's eyes held a distant resemblance to someone she couldn't immediately place. She set the photograph aside and carefully lifted the birth certificate. Although the paper was fragile and faded, she could read the vital portions. The father's name was listed as Raymond, full name. The mother's name was Nguyen Thi Ton. The child's name, Minh Lưu Whitmore. Born July 1972, Da Nang, South Vietnam. Nora's mind reeled. A child. A hidden child, fathered by Raymond. The year 1972, while Raymond was still in Vietnam. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she realized the weight of what she held. She managed to compose herself enough to close the box, though her hands shook. The manager asked politely if she needed anything else. She murmured no, pressing the folder to her chest as if it might vanish. She walked out into the bright afternoon, her world upended. A child? Raymond never once hinted at fathering a son overseas. Had he known? Why keep it secret all these decades? She recalled how he sometimes seemed haunted by regrets, but never had she imagined this. Back home, she locked the door, set down her purse, and slid the folder onto the kitchen table. She stared at it for hours, tears occasionally slipping down her cheeks. She felt betrayed, grieving anew. She had thought her marriage was built on honesty. She recalled small signs. Raymond scanning newspapers for war updates even decades later. Random donations he made to charities aiding Southeast Asian refugees. She had teased him about his persistent interest in that region. He would only smile, eyes tinged with sorrow. Now she saw there was a deeper reason. In a haze, she wandered the house, searching for any clue that might confirm or deny the child's existence. Eventually, in the basement, she found a battered trunk among his old service gear. She lifted the lid and discovered neatly folded uniforms, medals, and a box labeled "Private." Taped beneath the lid was a single envelope. On it, in Raymond's handwriting, was "For my son, if I find him." Inside was an unsent letter. She pulled it out, heart pounding. The letter read, "Dear Min, I spent decades searching Red Cross records. After the fall of Saigon, I tried desperately to find your mother. I was told repeatedly she hadn't survived. Over time, I had to stop, not because I forgot, but because I couldn't bear the grief of silence. I never stopped thinking of you. I never stopped loving you. I'm sorry for every birthday I missed, for every moment you grew up without a father by your side. I hope one day we'll meet. Your father, Raymond." Nora pressed the letter to her chest, tears sliding down her face. The man she loved had carried this heartbreak alone, perhaps believing it was too late or too dangerous to reveal. She felt confusion, anger, pity, and an overwhelming sorrow for him. He must have believed Min was lost, or that the mother had died. He had tried, it seemed, to locate them, then maybe gave up out of despair. That night she barely slept. She paced the living room, reading the birth certificate repeatedly, memorizing the child's name. She pictured him as a grown man now, in his 40s, somewhere in Vietnam or beyond, unaware his father had never forgotten him. She wrestled with how to process the betrayal, but also recognized that perhaps it wasn't a betrayal so much as a wound too painful to share. She decided, with trembling resolve, that she would try to find Min, if he still lived, and offer him the truth and final words from his father. It felt like an act of closure, both for herself and for the memory of the man she had adored. First, she had no idea where to begin. She tried the official channels, veterans associations, Red Cross offices. Weeks turned into months of stony silence or fruitless leads. She discovered that after 1975, chaos reigned for many families, records destroyed or lost amid the exodus. She wrote letters, made phone calls, scoured the internet, found nothing. Each new dead end chipped away at her hope, yet she persisted, fueled by a need to fulfill Raymond's unspoken wish. Then, by sheer luck, she connected with a volunteer at the Texas Tech Vietnam Center and Archive. They had war records, diaries, and contacts for those who specialized in reuniting American veterans with families in Vietnam. The volunteer put her in touch with a retired lieutenant named Charles Harker, who had served with Raymond. She remembered hearing that name in passing once, so she set up a call with him. Harker spoke kindly, apologizing for not being more help earlier. He described how Raymond was quiet but dedicated, known for his empathy toward local communities. "He never talked about fathering a child," Harker said, "but I suspected. He asked once about immigration forms for a Vietnamese mother and child. Then the fall of Saigon happened, and everything went dark. He never brought it up again." Nora's heart clenched, imagining Raymond's despair in that abrupt silence. She told Harker of her plan to find Min, though she had no leads. Harker, touched by her resolve, offered to help. He had a friend who once handled documents for orphan tracking post-1975, and another who had connections to genealogical researchers in Vietnam. He warned Nora that time might have scattered any trace of the mother or child, and that many war children relocated or changed their names. Nora braced herself for the possibility that Min might not be found or might not want to be found. She recognized that decades of resentment could have built up, or he might even blame Raymond for abandoning him. Still, she pressed on. Emails flew back and forth with Harker's contacts. She shared scans of the birth certificate, the photograph of the boy with his mother. The mother's name was Nguyen Thi Ton, a common enough name that searching for her was daunting. The photograph showed a storefront with some signage partially visible. A Vietnamese contact recognized certain regional details pointing to Hoi An or Da Nang, but the sign was too blurred. Another lead suggested that some local records might remain in the old district offices, but only if they hadn't been destroyed. Nora found herself on a plane to Vietnam, heart pounding at the enormity of it. She was in her 70s, traveling half the world, fueled by a promise to a man who never told her about this secret child. The mixture of heartbreak and determination carried her. She landed in Da Nang, stepping into a wall of humid heat, the sky brimming with the screech of mopeds and bustling streets. The swirl of unfamiliar sights and sounds overwhelmed her, but she pressed forward, taking a taxi to a modest guest house. She reminded herself that if Raymond had done so much for this child, he never even got to meet. She could do her part now. Harker had connected her with a local translator named Lean, who met Nora at the guest house. Lean was younger, in her 30s, with a calm smile. She listened sympathetically to Nora's story, marveling at the old photograph. Lean promised to help search local administrative offices, see if any mention of a child named Min Whitmore or a mother named Nguyen Thi Ton might exist. Over the next days, they navigated labyrinthine bureaucracies. Some staff were kind, others suspicious. Many files were incomplete. Repeatedly, they hit dead ends. Nora felt frustration and a dull ache in her chest as the days blurred under the scorching sun. In quieter hours, she roamed the city's markets with Lean, absorbing the culture. She pictured Raymond, decades younger, forging relationships with locals, forming bonds that eventually led him to love a woman named Ton. She found a sense of closeness to him here, in the tang of fish sauce and the swirl of voices. She realized how little she knew of that era. The possibility that he had a child, one who might have grown up fatherless, haunted her. She prayed that if he was alive, he would accept the final letter Raymond left. One afternoon, Lean showed up at the guest house with cautious hope. She had discovered a record referencing a child with a partial matching name, living once in an orphanage near Hoi An. The time frame loosely matched the 1970s. However, the orphanage records indicated the child left in 1980 with a Catholic charity group. No mention of a father's name. It was an ambiguous lead, but it was something. With Lean's help, Nora visited the old orphanage. The elderly nuns there rummaged through tattered ledgers. They found references to a boy named Min, but the last name was uncertain. The notes said his mother died, father unknown. The boy eventually left for the countryside with an aunt. No further details. Nora's heart sank. Could this be the same boy? She had no proof. The letter was no help because it never reached him. She returned to her guest house that night, feeling her energy slip away. The noise outside was lively, motorcycles zipping by, the faint buzz of electricity in the air. She lay awake, thinking about how she had once believed her marriage was built on total honesty. Now she saw that Raymond had shouldered a heartbreak so large it might have torn him apart if he had let it in. She wondered if she was chasing ghosts. She recalled Harker's warning that Min might resent Raymond. She dreaded discovering that possibility. Days later, Lean, undeterred, made contact with a local genealogist who specialized in reuniting families split by the war. This genealogist recognized the name Nguyen Thi Ton from records indicating she once worked in Da Nang as a shopkeeper. He discovered a note that she died in 1978 from illness, leaving behind a son, Min, who was about 6 at the time. The genealogist believed the boy might have ended up with distant relatives near a village outside Hoi An. The trail ended there, but it was more specific. Nora felt renewed hope. She and Lean took a rickety bus, traveling dusty roads lined with rice paddies, stopping at small hamlets to inquire about any relatives of a woman named Ton. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Nora's feet ached. She felt her age keenly, yet she soldiered on. They endured suspicious glances, half-lost addresses, contradictory rumors. Finally, in one small village, an elderly woman recognized the name. Ton? She died a long time ago. She had a son, Min. He left the village many years back. Went north maybe, or to another city. Another dead end. The genealogist, once optimistic, apologized for the labyrinth of fragmented records. Lean tried to comfort Nora, reminding her that many families scattered or changed names. Still, Nora refused to give up. She felt near exhaustion, physically and emotionally, when the genealogist arrived at her guest house one evening with bright eyes. "I found something else," he said, out of breath. "There's a local man who claims he knew Min. He said Min ended up in Hoi An, running a small carpentry workshop. Maybe you can talk to him." Nora's pulse soared. She and Lean arranged a meeting. The next day, they found themselves in a cramped workshop on a side street in Hoi An, sawdust and wood shavings littering the floor. The man, a middle-aged local, explained that a man named Min once worked there, but left some years back for the outskirts. He rummaged in an old ledger and found an address. "He might still be there," he said, "though I heard he travels for labor contracts. Not sure if he's home." With trembling hope, Nora borrowed a motorized rickshaw with Lean, heading to the address. They arrived at a small, sun-baked house behind a row of banana trees. The yard was modest, a few chickens scuttling about. Lean knocked, calling out in Vietnamese. A moment later, a door opened. A man in his 40s or early 50s emerged, cautious. He had dark hair and wore a simple shirt and pants, face lined with the weathered marks of a hard life. He looked at them expectantly, and Lean explained they were searching for a man named Min. He frowned. Then he nodded and said something to Lean, who translated for Nora. "He is Min, yes, but he doesn't know you." Nora's heart hammered, tears forming. In halting words, she tried to explain. "My name is Nora. My husband was Raymond Whitmore. He served in Vietnam. I believe he was your father." She handed him the photograph of the boy with his mother, plus the birth certificate. She saw confusion and a flicker of shock ripple across his features. He took the items, studied them, glancing warily at Lean, who repeated the gist in Vietnamese. His eyes darted between the birth certificate and the old photograph, then back to Nora's face, searching for signs of deception. At last he spoke softly, voice trembling. Lean translated. "He says he grew up hearing only that his father was an American soldier who abandoned them. His mother died, and he lived on scraps of rumor. He never believed he'd see any trace of his father." Nora's tears fell, and she managed to say that Raymond never forgot him, that he tried searching after the war. She produced Raymond's unsent letter, carefully translated into Vietnamese by Lean. Min read it with a stoic expression, but tears shimmered in his eyes. He read how Raymond had been told mother and child did not survive, how he gave up eventually out of despair, never out of disinterest. Min swallowed hard, wrestling with a swirl of emotions. In those first moments, the tension was palpable. He seemed torn between anger at decades of longing and disbelief that Raymond actually cared. Lean took a step back, giving them space. Nora gently offered a small box containing a few tokens from Raymond. His dog tags, a photograph of him in later life, and a typed letter acknowledging his regret. Min accepted them, holding them as though they were artifacts from another planet. The tears he held back threatened to slip free. He half turned away, struggling with old resentments. Nora felt her chest tighten. This was the child Raymond loved yet never met. Eventually, Min ushered them inside, a gesture that signaled a willingness to listen. The house was spare, a single table, a few chairs, and a fan stirring the heavy air. They sat, and Lean facilitated a halting conversation. Min recounted that he grew up in near poverty, with an aunt who sometimes resented him, associating him with the father who abandoned them. He faced prejudice as an Amerasian child. He left for the city in his teens, drifting among menial jobs. He married once, but it ended quickly, no children. He asked Nora why it took so long for them to come. Nora explained how Raymond had tried official channels but was told mother and child had died. That eventually heartbreak forced him to stop. She described how, after his death, she found the safe deposit box, the documents. She concluded, voice trembling, that it was Raymond's final wish to connect, even if he never spoke it aloud. Min listened, tears slipping. Then he spoke in a choked whisper, which Lean translated. He's always felt alone, that his father walked away. Now, hearing this, he doesn't know how to feel. Nora gently placed her hand on his, if he would allow. She told him he had every right to be angry, to feel betrayed. She offered no excuses except that war is cruel, that systems fail, that people lose each other in the chaos. She said, Raymond never forgave himself for not finding you. Min sat in silence, tears on his cheeks. The day ended with him quietly ushering them out, though not unkindly, promising to think about the next steps. Nora spent sleepless nights in her guest house, uncertain if Min would reject her or keep contact. Lean tried to comfort her, pointing out that he was clearly moved. Perhaps he needed time. Indeed, a week passed with no word. Then, late one afternoon, a timid knock sounded at the guesthouse door. Min stood there, eyes lowered. He asked through Lean if they could talk more, about what kind of man Raymond was, about any siblings. So began a series of emotional meetings in which Nora, with Lean's help, recounted Raymond's life after the war. How he returned quiet, married Nora, settled into a stable job, fathered no children with Nora. They had tried but faced miscarriages. She described his gentle ways, his love of routine and subtle humor. She showed photos from birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas mornings with extended family. She watched as Min absorbed these glimpses, his expression a tapestry of longing and sorrow. She asked if he wanted to share about his own life. He confided that he worked as a craftsman, making wooden carvings, that he had built a life alone, wary of trusting anyone after facing stigma as an Amerasian child. He admitted he always resented his father for never coming back. Hearing about Raymond's efforts to locate him, about the false information from agencies, softened Min's bitterness. They spoke haltingly about the possibilities of them forging a relationship now, even though Raymond was gone. He rummaged in a drawer at one point, producing an old, tattered photograph of a young woman in an Audi, his mother, and a toddler version of himself. We had so little, he said. She said my father was kind, but forced to leave. Nora's eyes brimmed with tears. She recognized the face from Raymond's photograph of the storefront. That was the family he left behind, thinking they were lost. The tragedy of it all weighed heavily on them both. As the days passed, their conversations grew more open. Nora gave him Raymond's final note, the one she found in the basement trunk. Min read it many times, each reading revealing fresh tears. He said softly, "He wrote that he never stopped thinking of me. Maybe I can let go of some anger now." The turning point came when Nora explained how she discovered all this only after Raymond died, that she had traveled so far alone just to honor his memory. Min realized that if Raymond had truly abandoned him, Nora would have had no reason to do such a thing. That realization brought him a measure of comfort, though the heartbreak still ran deep. Eventually, Nora's extended visa came to an end, and she prepared to return home. She and Min had formed a tentative bond, exchanging addresses and phone numbers. She invited him to visit the United States someday, if he wished to see where Raymond had lived. He was non-committal, uncertain about leaving Vietnam after so many difficulties. But he thanked her for reaching out, for letting him see that his father was not a heartless man. On the last day, he presented her with a small wooden box he had carved. Inside it lay a jade pendant shaped like a lotus blossom, symbolizing renewal. "For your safe journey," he said through Lean. She wept, touched by this gesture. They parted with an embrace, tears in both their eyes, each uncertain what the future might hold but grateful for the truth at last. Back in the States, Nora felt a profound shift within her. She had faced a hidden realm of Raymond's life and found that it didn't diminish her love for him. Instead, it enriched it, showing how wide and complex a single life can be. She visited his grave soon after returning, placing the jade lotus at the base of the headstone. She spoke aloud, telling Raymond that she had found Min, that he was alive, that he had grown into a resilient man. She thanked Raymond for the quiet courage he displayed, for never giving up in spirit even when official records told him his family was gone. She believed that if there were an afterlife, Raymond's soul would find peace in that knowledge. Life resumed its rhythms. She wrote long letters to Min, describing more about Raymond, including funny anecdotes. He replied carefully occasionally. He told her about his daily routines, how each day he rose early to craft wooden sculptures, how he sold them at a local market, how he had few close friends but had carved out a life that was stable. He asked about her home, about American customs. She sensed he was tiptoeing into building a new connection, uncertain but curious. She never pressed him for more than he was willing to give, recalling how easy it was to wound the heart of someone who spent decades feeling abandoned. A minor subplot emerged when Nora's niece, Emily, took an interest in the story. Emily was in her mid-20s, training as a documentary filmmaker. She asked if she could interview Nora about discovering a hidden Vietnamese child. Nora hesitated, worried it might exploit the family's privacy. But she recognized Emily's sincerity. Emily wanted to produce a short personal piece, exploring how war leaves invisible scars on families. Nora eventually agreed to a discreet interview, revealing only the broad strokes. She did not name Min or show his photograph. The interview helped Nora process her emotions, speaking them aloud in a structured way. By the end, Emily was in tears, hugging her aunt, promising to keep the details private. This smaller storyline helped unify the extended family, prompting new appreciation for the complexities of war and the resilience of love. Meanwhile, Nora experienced a surprising internal transformation. She grew more adventurous, reminding herself that if she could travel to Vietnam alone in her 70s, she could handle smaller challenges. She joined a local civic group focusing on cultural exchange with Southeast Asia. She made new friends, telling them a carefully edited version of her story. She wrote an article for their newsletter about bridging divides between American veterans and Vietnamese families, gently referencing the importance of compassion. People responded warmly, touched by her message. She found that giving voice to the silent trauma others carried was her way of honoring Raymond. She never allowed personal bitterness to overshadow the compassion she wanted to convey. Months passed, and she received an unexpected letter from Min. It came with a photograph, him standing outside his workshop, holding a sign with an American flag drawn on it. He wrote that he was saving up money to possibly travel to America someday to see Raymond's grave, to walk in the places his father called home. He asked if Nora would accept him. She cried upon reading it, overcame with relief and a maternal warmth. She wrote back that he was always welcome, that the home she and Raymond shared remained open to him if he ever came. She included a map of their town, marking the local spots Raymond frequented, inviting him into the memory of the father he never knew. The day came when she decided to finalize a small memorial of her own. She took an old family album, inserted new pages for the pictures of Min and his mother, the birth certificate, and the letters Raymond wrote. She wrote a caption beneath them in calm, steady handwriting. Raymond's secret, at last revealed. Love across an ocean, found in time. She believed that in bridging these two families, she was fulfilling Raymond's final wish, even if he never stated it aloud. She also included a translation of the note from the trunk, so that if her grandchildren read the album decades later, they would see the fullness of Raymond's heart. The younger generation might glean that family is more than what meets the eye. Her own grown children had varied reactions. Her son, David, expressed cautious acceptance, worried about the legal ramifications or potential inheritance issues. But Nora assured him that she wanted to share what was due, if any inheritance remained, to Min if he wanted it. David eventually conceded that it was a moral obligation, though the legal complexities might be daunting. Her daughter, Ruth, was more openly emotional, feeling heartbreak for the brother she never met. They all navigated the shock together, leaning on each other in a way they hadn't for years. The revelation, though painful, also deepened their unity as a family. They pledged to do right by Min. Near the one-year anniversary of Nora's initial trip, she received word from Min that he had secured a visa for a short visit to the U.S. The process was complicated, but with help from local organizations he managed. Nora was both excited and anxious. She prepared the guest room, carefully tidied the house, displaying small reminders of Raymond's life that might resonate with Min. She worried about bridging the cultural gap, about how to handle the local community's curiosity. But she believed it was the right step. When Min arrived at the airport, Nora recognized him immediately from the photograph. He wore simple clothes, clutching a small bag. She waved timidly, and he approached with equal hesitance. They exchanged an awkward hug, with Lean's cousin present as a translator, though Min's English was improving from their earlier conversations. He marveled at the size of the airport, at the bustle. She noticed how he studied each detail, soaking in the environment. She drove him home, pointing out local landmarks. He commented quietly that it felt surreal to see where his father had lived an entire life unknown to him. In the days that followed, they explored the town. Nora took him to the local diner where Raymond enjoyed breakfasts of pancakes, to the hardware store where Raymond bought small tools to fix squeaky doors, to the park where he strolled on Sunday afternoons. Each place, she shared a memory, and Min listened intently. Sometimes, tears welled in his eyes. She realized he was grieving the father he never got to meet, feeling the weight of lost decades. One afternoon, they visited Raymond's grave. Min stood before the headstone for a long time, silent. Eventually, he placed a small wooden carving, a symbol of paternal gratitude, beside it. Then he bowed his head, tears drifting onto the grass. Nora stepped back, letting him have a private moment with the father he knew only by rumor. She saw him tremble, understood that in his mind, he might be grappling with what could have been if war and fate had not intervened. After some time, he turned to her. He spoke softly in English, a phrase he had practiced. "I forgive him, and I thank him." She embraced him, her heart full of sorrow and relief. She felt that this moment was the completion of a circle begun decades ago, across oceans and conflict. They spent the remainder of Min's visit forging a deeper bond. She introduced him to David and Ruth, who, though initially awkward, welcomed him. They shared photos of Raymond from their childhood, family gatherings, birthdays. Min showed them pictures of his workshop and crafts. Over meals, they told stories about Raymond's quirks, how he insisted on finishing the newspaper's crossword alone, how he arranged the spice rack alphabetically. Min listened, sometimes laughing in surprise, seeing the father's personality shining through. They overcame language barriers with simple gestures, genuine warmth, and occasional translation help. The siblings found an unexpected sense of kinship. At times, David asked about legalities of inheritance, but Min politely refused any claim, saying he only came for understanding, not money. The graciousness of that gesture moved them all. Shortly before Min's departure, they organized a small gathering in the backyard, reminiscent of how Raymond loved to host barbecues for close friends. A few neighbors came, Liz from next door who recalled Raymond's devotion to yard work, an old friend of Carl's who had known him from church, and David and Ruth's families. Min was introduced as a friend from Vietnam, though some guesses were made. Nora discreetly told a few that he was Raymond's lost son. People were kind, but a hush of wonder lingered. They dined under string lights, telling anecdotes. Min offered a toast in broken English. "To the father who found me," in his own way, tears shimmering. Emotions ran high, but the evening ended with quiet contentment. When it came time for Min to leave, he and Nora embraced at the airport, a far gentler farewell than the first day they met. She told him that the door was always open, that they were family. He agreed to keep in touch, exchanging email addresses with David and Ruth, who wanted to help him if he ever needed anything. She slipped a small envelope into his hand, containing a note from Raymond's trunk that she hadn't shown him earlier, which said simply, "I hope you grow into a man of strength and kindness. Though I can't guide you in person, I hold you in my heart always." He accepted it, eyes brimming with gratitude, then vanished into the terminal, carrying with him the memory of a father he had never known in life but discovered in death. Nora returned home, feeling both sadness and relief. She had completed the quest that Raymond's safe deposit box had set in motion. She had brought the final piece of Raymond's life to light, forging a connection across time and heartbreak. Life resumed, but it was subtly different. She no longer felt the pang of betrayal. Instead, she felt a gentle pride in the quiet man she married, who had once risked everything for love in a foreign land, only to be parted by war's cruelty. She carried that knowledge like a hidden jewel. Some secrets, she realized, were not kept out of deception but out of heartbreak. She wrote a final entry in her personal journal. Raymond's silence was not a wall between us, but a shelter. Now, with our family enlarged by one more soul, his secret is no longer a burden. It is a gift, uniting us across oceans. In the months that followed, the extended family dynamic shifted in small but meaningful ways. David, who had been cautious, became more open-hearted. He reached out to Min via email, sharing pictures of family events. Ruth, who always had a soft spot for emotional connections, corresponded with him, discussing daily life, bridging continents. Meanwhile, Nora found that the next time she visited Raymond's grave, she had an extra flower to lay, one for the father he was, and one for the father he never got to be. She whispered a prayer of thanks that at least part of his longing found resolution in the connection with Min. Perhaps if he were watching, he could rest easier. A year passed. Nora updated her will, specifying that a portion of the estate would be set aside for Min, should he wish to claim it. She also left instructions that the story of Raymond's hidden child be included in the family records, so that no future generation would have to uncover it the hard way. She wrote, "Though it began as a secret, it ends with acceptance, a testimony to the abiding power of love that spans war, decades, heartbreak." She felt a weight lift from her heart as she finalized those details. She believed that continuing to hide the truth would only perpetuate sorrow. She had learned the lesson that truth, while painful, can set hearts free. In the final reflection, she assembled a new family album. On one page, she placed a photograph of Raymond in uniform, young and solemn. Beside it, she put the old photograph of Min as a boy with his mother, and another of Min standing proudly by his workshop in present day. She wrote a simple caption beneath them in her steady handwriting. "Different times, different worlds, one love unspoken until now." She found tears slipping down her cheeks, but they were tears of closure, not despair. Eventually, she made a second journey to Vietnam, this time less anxious, more at peace, to see how Min was faring. He greeted her at the airport with a single white lily, a gesture reminiscent of the quiet grace she saw in his father. They spent a week visiting temples and markets, forging deeper trust. She noticed how his eyes crinkled in the same way Raymond's did when he felt amused. She recognized glimpses of Raymond's calm presence in the way Min approached tasks with quiet diligence. She believed that by forging this bond, she was honoring both father and son, bridging a rift that war had carved open. The day she left Vietnam the second time, Min handed her a final parting gift, a wooden carving of a father embracing a small child. It was simple, unpainted, but exquisite in its emotion. He said, "For us to remember, we are family no matter the distance." She hugged him, tears flowing freely, promising to return. She thought of how content Raymond would be if he could see them now, two souls joined by his legacy of silent devotion. Back home, she placed the carving on the mantel, next to a framed photograph of Raymond. The silent figure of father and child stood as a testament to the love that blossomed from a single key in a safe deposit box. She occasionally lit a small candle there in the evening, reflecting on the journey that began with betrayal and ended with understanding. She realized that if not for Raymond's final note taped to that key, she might never have uncovered the truth. She whispered a prayer of gratitude for his subtle nudge from beyond the grave, guiding her to complete what he could not. As time settled into a gentle routine, Nora found the ache of losing Raymond coexisting with the warmth of having a new family member in Min. She felt renewed purpose, sometimes speaking quietly at local gatherings about the importance of bridging cultural gaps. She never spelled out her personal story in detail. Some secrets remain intimate, but she let her experience shape her compassion for others who carry hidden wounds. People noticed a glow in her presence, as if she had faced sorrow and found light on the other side. The months turned into years, and life carried on with its quiet joys and sorrows. Nora remained in her home, carefully tending the small garden she and Raymond once cultivated. The squeaky doors and leaky faucets she now tried to fix herself, chuckling at her clumsiness, remembering how effortlessly Raymond handled them. She left a pair of his slippers by the bed, a small comfort, though she no longer felt the raw grief that once haunted her. She recognized that healing does not erase love. It expands it to hold both memory and acceptance. One day, near the anniversary of her second trip to Vietnam, she got a phone call. It was Catherine, her neighbor's daughter, who had become something of a surrogate granddaughter to her. Catherine told her that the small documentary Emily had planned was completed, though it was more of a personal short film about war children and missing family connections. Catherine asked if Nora might watch it. Nora, after careful thought, agreed. She watched the film in the comfort of her living room. The film included interviews with a few Amerasian children from various wars, discreet references to the heartbreak they faced. It ended with a reflection on how, in rare cases, families overcame the gap. Nora felt tears rolling down her cheeks, wishing she could show it to Raymond, or even to Min. She believed it captured a truth, that across seas and decades, love can mend the deepest wounds if given a chance. In the quiet epilogue of her life, Nora recognized that though she discovered a hidden child, the story was not about betrayal but about silent courage and unwavering loyalty. She realized that, in some sense, Raymond had never truly abandoned anyone. He was a man caught in the crossfire of a war's chaos, who made every effort within his limited power to find his lost child. Failing that, he shielded Nora from a heartbreak he feared would overshadow their marriage. Perhaps he believed that if he could not succeed in reuniting with Min, better to let Nora remain unburdened. She felt a wave of compassion for him, grieving anew that he died without seeing the resolution she eventually found. On a mild spring afternoon, she placed fresh flowers on Raymond's grave. This time, she included a small photograph of Min as he stood in her living room during his visit to America, a shy smile on his face. She wrote on the back, "He found his way home, dear Raymond. We found each other." Then she tucked it under a small stone so it wouldn't blow away. She stood there, letting a gentle breeze brush her hair. She closed her eyes and murmured a final thank you, both to Raymond for leading her to the truth, and to the child who forgave a father he never knew. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you found it meaningful, please be sure to like and subscribe for more.